I was standing on the edge of my jetty, watching the lake shimmer under the morning sun, when a white SUV screeched to a halt behind me. Out stormed a woman in oversized sunglasses, her voice sharp enough to cut through the calm breeze. She demanded I grant her and the HOA full access to my jetty, claiming it was community property. What she didn't know was that this jetty wasn't just mine, it was the cover entrance to a retired secret military base that I was sworn to protect. One wrong move from her, and this quiet morning could turn into something far more dangerous. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. The morning was calm, the kind of quiet that settles over the lake like a soft blanket. I was leaning against the porch railing of my cabin, sipping strong black coffee from my chipped mug, when the sound of screeching tires broke the silence. Gravel scattered across the lane as a white SUV came to an abrupt stop just outside my driveway. I knew instantly who it was. Karen. She'd been sniffing around my property for months, ever since the HOA decided they could flex their power over the entire lakefront. I'd ignored her thinly veiled threats and constant reminders about community rules, but now she was on my land, and that was the line. The driver's door slammed shut, and out she came like a storm, brewing trouble. Karen was dressed in her usual battle attire, oversized sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and a pastel-colored blouse that looked expensive enough to belong in a boutique window. Her high heels sank into the gravel with each determined step as she marched toward me, waving a clipboard like it was a weapon. "You can't keep this dock to yourself," she snapped before I could even set down my coffee. "The HOA has ruled that your jetty falls under community property. We're planning a summer cookout there this weekend, and you'll need to move your boat." I stared at her for a long second, letting her words hang in the air, and then slowly set my mug on the porch rail. "Karen, that jetty is on my land. My grandfather built it in 1965, long before the HOA even existed. It's not community property, it's private. And you know it." Karen rolled her eyes as if I'd just told her the earth was flat. "You signed the HOA agreement when you bought this place, and that agreement says no homeowner can block community access to shared amenities." I stepped off the porch, closing the distance between us. Shared amenities. "This isn't a swimming pool or a picnic table, Karen. It's my dock. You're standing on private property, and you need to leave before this turns into something ugly." She stiffened, clearly not used to being told no. "I'll call the board. I'll call the sheriff if I have to. You can't just bully your neighbors like this." I let out a sharp laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Bully, you're the one storming onto my land demanding access to something you don't own. You have no authority here. None." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line as she lifted her phone and started snapping photos of the jetty. "We'll see what the HOA has to say about this," she muttered. "Go ahead," I said, my voice low but steady. "Take all the pictures you want. Just remember, there's a reason that no trespassing sign is posted out there. This isn't just about property lines, it's about safety." That last word seemed to catch her attention, but she brushed it off with a scoff and a dismissive wave of her hand. "You're ridiculous. It's a dock, not Fort Knox." She had no idea. I watched her retreat to her SUV, her heels crunching on the gravel. Just before she slammed the door, she turned and shouted, "You'll be hearing from us, and sooner than you think." "Looking forward to it," I replied, keeping my tone calm even though I could feel my pulse hammering. When she finally drove off, I walked down to the jetty. The boards creaked under my boots, worn from years of sun, rain, and the weight of countless memories. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than an old wooden dock, just a place to fish or tie up a boat. But I knew better. Kneeling down, I ran my hand along the thick planks, feeling for the hidden seam that marked the hatch. Beneath this jetty was the entrance to something I'd sworn to protect, a decommissioned military base, buried beneath the lakefront. It wasn't active anymore, but what was left inside could never fall into the wrong hands. I checked the heavy padlock and the steel mechanism securing the hatch. Everything was in place. Still, Karen's intrusion left me unsettled. People like her didn't stop when they heard no. If anything, no just made them push harder. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the tree line, I fired up the grill and tossed a couple of ribeye steaks over the flames. The sizzle of fat hitting the coals should have relaxed me, but something felt off. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted headlights flicker in the distance too far to make out details, but close enough to keep me on edge. A car sat idling down the lane. Engine running, lights off. I set down the spatula and stepped to the edge of my property, staring hard at the shadowed vehicle until it finally rolled away. My gut tightened. Karen's little HOA stunt might be more than just neighborhood politics now. I took a long breath, the scent of searing steak mixing with the cool lake air. Karen had no idea what kind of hornet's nest she was kicking. If she pushed any further, she'd find out the hard way that this wasn't just about a dock or some HOA rulebook. It was about protecting something far bigger, something she couldn't even begin to comprehend. After Karen's SUV vanished down the lane, I stood on the edge of my jetty, watching the ripples of the lake catch the early evening light. I knew she'd be back. People like Karen don't just throw out threats and walk away, they come back louder, with reinforcements. But I also knew she was walking straight into something far beyond her understanding. I crouched down, fingers brushing against the worn wooden planks. They looked like any other dock to the untrained eye, weathered pine boards, silvered by decades of sun and rain. But underneath them lies a hatch most people wouldn't recognize even if they tripped over it. It's flush with the wood, reinforced with steel, and secured with a locking system I personally designed back when I served in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I didn't build this place. It's been here longer than I've been alive. During the Cold War, the government used this lake as a cover for a small research facility, one of those projects that never saw the light of day. My grandfather helped construct it, and later, I spent years maintaining the infrastructure after inheriting the property. It's officially decommissioned, but let's just say there are still things down there that shouldn't see daylight. People assume I'm just another middle-aged guy living by the water, retired and minding his own business. They have no clue about the contracts I've signed, the oaths I've taken, or the technology I've seen. There's a reason I keep the jetty locked down tighter than Fort Knox. As the sun sank lower, I grabbed a flashlight and lifted the hatch, listening to the familiar metallic click as the bolts disengaged. I stepped onto the steel ladder, climbing down into the cool, dim space below. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust, comforting in its own way. Below the dock lies a narrow corridor, reinforced concrete walls lined with old equipment and power systems. Some of it's outdated, but some, well, let's just say the public wouldn't know what to make of it. I walked down the hallway, checking the status lights on the control panels. Most systems were dormant, just as I'd left them, but I still felt that gnawing sense of unease. Karen's intrusion had stirred something in me. I paused at the end of the corridor, where a heavy door led to a room filled with sealed crates. Each one is stenciled with military markings that haven't faded in 50 years. Some hold standard equipment, old radios, spare parts, nothing remarkable. But others, I don't even touch those anymore. I just keep them locked, secure, and buried under layers of secrecy. Karen's voice still rang in my ears. You can't keep this dock to yourself. She had no idea how true and how false that statement was. If she or anyone else from the HOA managed to pry open this hatch, they'd find things that would raise questions I can't answer. Questions the government might not want anyone asking. I climbed back up, closing the hatch and locking it tight, double-checking the padlock. The boards creaked as I walked back to the porch, but every step felt heavier than the last. Karen's persistence was a problem. If she got the HOA board involved, they'd try to push through legal channels, maybe even send someone to inspect the dock. I'd have to find a way to keep them at bay without drawing too much attention. Later that night, I sat on the porch, nursing a glass of bourbon and watching the moonlight shimmer on the water. My old dog, Rusty, lay at my feet, his ears twitching at every sound. At one point, he perked up, growling low at something I couldn't see across the lake. I followed his gaze and caught the faint glimmer of a flashlight in the trees. I set the bourbon down and grabbed my rifle from the corner of the porch. I didn't aim, not yet, but I wanted whoever was out there to know I wasn't a man to be trifled with. The light vanished after a moment, but my gut told me this wasn't random. Someone was sniffing around, and I wouldn't be surprised if Karen had sent them. The truth is, I've lived most of my life preparing for moments like this. You don't spend years working in classified engineering projects without learning to expect trouble where you least want it. But this was different. This wasn't some foreign threat or covert mission. This was a stubborn woman with too much time and too much authority on her hands. I knew I couldn't let this spiral. The next time Karen came knocking, she'd get a side of me she wasn't ready for. I had to protect this place, not just for myself, but for what's hidden beneath it. And if that meant going head-to-head with the HOA, so be it. As I finished my drink and looked out over the lake, I made a silent promise if Karen and her board tried to cross that line again, I'd make sure they regretted it. They think they're dealing with some quiet old man with a stubborn streak. What they don't know is that they're poking at something far more dangerous than a property dispute. By the next morning, I knew Karen had already started her campaign. People like her never waste time. I could feel the tension in the neighborhood before I even opened my front door. My phone buzzed twice before breakfast, 2 missed calls from unknown numbers, which I ignored. Then came the email. The subject line read, HOA Notice, Dock Access Complaint. I opened it and skimmed through the long-winded message filled with legal-sounding nonsense. The HOA board claimed that my jetty interfered with the community's enjoyment of shared lake resources and demanded that I provide reasonable access to all homeowners. They even had the nerve to give me a deadline, 3 days to comply, or they'd pursue further action. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the walls of my kitchen. Further action? Huh. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I sat down at the table, opened my laptop, and started drafting a response. I was firm but professional, pointing out that the jetty was on private land, built decades before the HOA even existed. I cited county property records, attached copies of my deed, and reminded them that trespassing laws in this state aren't exactly lenient. Before I hit send, Rusty started barking. I looked up just in time to see another SUV rolling down my lane, this one black, with tinted windows. My jaw tightened. 2 men stepped out, dressed in polo shirts and khakis. HOA board members, no doubt. They walked with that entitled swagger I've seen too many times, the kind that says, "We're here to tell you how to live." "Morning," I said, stepping onto the porch, my coffee mug in hand. "Mr. Walker," one of them asked. His tone clipped. "That's me," I replied. "We're here to inspect the dock," the second man said. "The HOA received a complaint, and we need to ensure everything is up to code for community use." I let the silence hang for a moment before responding. "You're not setting foot on that dock. Not today. Not ever. That dock is not community property, and you don't have the authority to inspect a damn thing on my land." The first man's face reddened. "Sir, refusal to cooperate with the HOA can result in fines and—" "Go ahead," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Fine me. Call your lawyers. Call whoever you want. Just remember, you're trespassing right now. You've got 10 seconds to leave before I make this a sheriff's problem." They exchanged uneasy glances. One of them muttered something about coming back with paperwork, but they retreated to their SUV and drove off. I stood there, watching the dust settle on the road, and felt my patience thinning. Karen was behind all of this. I could practically see her grinning behind those oversized sunglasses, thinking she'd backed me into a corner. She was wrong. That afternoon, I made a few calls of my own. Old friends from my Army days guys who owed me favors. I wasn't about to drag them into a petty HOA dispute, but I wanted to know my options. A retired colonel I trust told me something that made me smile. "Walker, that jetty is covered by federal protection because of its history. The HOA can bark all they want, but legally, they can't touch it. If they try, they'll be the ones in trouble." That was exactly what I needed to hear. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't stop Karen. The woman had a talent for escalating things. Sure enough, by evening, I spotted her SUV again, this time parked halfway down the lane with her phone pointed at my property, recording video. I walked out to the end of the driveway, calm as can be, and waved. "Need a better shot? I can pose with the no trespassing sign if you want." I called out. She lowered her phone, her face red with frustration. "You think you're clever, don't you? "We'll see how clever you are when the sheriff shows up tomorrow." "Great," I said. "I'll have coffee ready for him." She let out a growl of frustration and drove off, tires spinning. That night, I sat on the porch with Rusty at my feet and a bourbon in hand. The crickets were loud, the lake calm, but I couldn't shake the nagging thought that Karen wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted or until I made her regret ever stepping foot near my property. I pulled out my old military notebook and started sketching a plan. If Karen wanted a war, she'd get one. And the first shot wouldn't come from me yelling or threatening. It would come from me using every ounce of leverage and knowledge I had to make sure she and her precious HOA never set foot near that jetty again. The next morning started with a heaviness in the air, the kind that settles over your shoulders before a storm. I was up early, walking the perimeter of my property, with Rusty trotting alongside me. The lake was calm, but something in my gut told me trouble was coming. Karen wasn't the type to cool off overnight. Sure enough, by mid-morning, I spotted a sedan idling on the far side of the lake. It wasn't unusual for people to park there and fish, but this car wasn't moving. The driver wasn't casting a line or enjoying the view. They were just sitting there, watching. I pulled out my binoculars and caught the glint of a camera lens pointed in my direction. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "Karen must have sent someone to spy on me." Rusty barked, his ears perked and body tense. He always sensed trouble before I did. I gave him a pat on the head and kept my eyes on the car until it finally rolled away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. My patience was thinning by the minute. Around noon, I received a text from a local friend. "Hey, did you know Karen's spreading rumors at the town diner? She says your dock is dangerous and not up to code." I clenched my jaw. It wasn't enough for her to harass me directly. Now she was trying to turn the town against me. I decided it was time to pay the HOA board a visit. I drove into town, parking my truck right in front of the HOA office. It's a small building, more like a glorified storage shed, with an official-looking sign out front. Inside, the board members were huddled around a table, papers scattered like they were planning a military operation. Karen was there, of course, looking smug as ever. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Walker," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "We were just talking about your refusal to cooperate." I planted my hands on the table, leaning in close. "Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. That jetty is private property. You have no legal authority over it, and the next person who steps foot on it without my permission will be charged with trespassing. Are we clear?" One of the board members shifted uncomfortably, but Karen just smirked. "We'll see about that. I've already contacted the county inspector." "Good," I shot back. "Make sure he brings a copy of the property map. He'll see exactly where your authority ends." The room went quiet after that. I turned on my heel and walked out, not giving them the satisfaction of a parting glance. Back at the cabin, I decided to double-check the hatch beneath the jetty. I'd reinforced the locks years ago, but Karen's persistence had me thinking about worst-case scenarios. I crouched down, ran my fingers along the steel frame, and made sure every bolt was tight. The hidden mechanism was still flawless, just as I designed it. As I stood up, something caught my eye, a set of fresh footprints in the mud along the shoreline. They weren't mine. Someone had been snooping around recently, maybe last night. That evening, I set up a few motion-activated cameras around the property. I've learned the hard way that having eyes in the dark can make all the difference. I also pulled my old security contacts from the Army, letting them know I might need a quick check on anyone digging into my background or this land. Around midnight, Rusty's barking jolted me awake. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, stepping out onto the porch. The beam of my light caught a shadow moving near the trees. I didn't call out, I just watched. Whoever it was ducked back into the woods as soon as they realized I'd seen them. The next morning, I checked the camera footage. There it was, a tall figure in dark clothes, holding what looked like a phone or small camera, snapping shots of my jetty. My blood ran hot. Karen had taken this too far. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. This was a breach of privacy, and I wouldn't stand for it. I printed a few still images from the camera and slipped them into an envelope. It was time to make a statement. By noon, I left a copy of the footage in the HOA mailbox with a handwritten note: "Trespassing is a crime. This is your only warning." Later, as I sat on my porch, I spotted Karen reading the note, her face turning red as she crumpled it in her hand. For a moment, I thought I saw hesitation in her eyes, but then she stormed off, phone in hand, no doubt plotting her next move. I took a long breath, feeling the weight of the coming storm. Karen wasn't just poking at the hornet's nest anymore, she was shaking it, and I was ready to make sure she got stung. By the 5th day, I knew that waiting for Karen to stop wasn't an option. She'd turned my private lakefront into her battleground, and if I didn't push back hard, she'd keep escalating until the sheriff, the county, or some clueless lawyer tried to step foot on my jetty. That wasn't going to happen, not on my watch. I started the morning by calling an old friend, Jack Henderson, a retired federal marshal. Jack and I had been through enough sticky situations to know when to act and when to hold back. As soon as I explained the harassment, the rumors, and the trespassing attempts, Jack's tone changed. "Walker," he said, "these HOA people have no clue who they're messing with. You've got a federally protected structure there. If they keep pushing, you've got the right to make them stop. Want me to pay a visit?" "Not yet," I said, "but I'll need your name on standby if they force my hand." After hanging up, I spent the next few hours gathering every document I had about the jetty and the land. I printed maps, survey records, and the letter from the Department of Defense confirming the site's historical classification. Then, I made a few copies. If Karen thought she could scare me with legal threats, she was in for a shock. By noon, I drove into town with Rusty riding shotgun. I stopped at the sheriff's office first, walking in with the confidence of someone who knows the law is on his side. Sheriff Daniels, a no-nonsense man who's known me for years, raised an eyebrow as I set the paperwork on his desk. "I'm getting harassed by the HOA. I told him plainly, they're trespassing on my land and threatening to override federal property rights." Daniels leafed through the documents, whistling low when he saw the DOD letter. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "I didn't realize you were sitting on a classified site. They've got no jurisdiction there. Walker, if they keep this up, I'll back you up personally." "Appreciate it," I said. "Just make sure Karen knows she's walking on thin ice." With the sheriff on my side, I made my next stop at the HOA office. I walked in, dropped a sealed folder of documents on the front desk, and looked Karen straight in the eye. "You wanted access. Here's everything you need to know about why you'll never get it," I said. She grabbed the folder and started flipping through the pages. Her smug smile faltered as she saw the official stamps and signatures. "What is this?" she asked, her voice rising. "That," I said, "is a federal designation. This jetty is classified as protected infrastructure. You so much as touch it without clearance, and you're committing a federal crime. I'd suggest you and your board think very carefully about your next step." For the first time, Karen didn't have a snappy comeback. She just stood there, gripping that folder like it might bite her. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "You've been trespassing, harassing, and spreading lies about me. If I see one more car parked near my property or one more camera pointed at my dock, I'll have Daniels and federal agents knocking on your door. Are we clear?" She blinked, but she didn't speak. I turned and walked out, not bothering to look back. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cigar and a glass of bourbon, watching the sun sink behind the tree line. For the first time all week, I felt a sense of calm. Rusty lay beside me, tail wagging lazily, as if he knew we'd just won a small battle. But the war wasn't over. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from a neighbor. "Karen's furious. She's saying you threatened her with the feds." I smirked. Let her talk. The truth was, she wasn't wrong. If she crossed me again, I'd have no problem bringing in higher authorities. Still, I had the uneasy feeling that Karen wouldn't take her defeat quietly. People like her don't back down, they regroup, they plot, and they come back swinging. I decided to stay a step ahead. Before turning in for the night, I walked the property again, checking the cameras and sensors I'd installed. I made sure the hatch under the jetty was locked tight and reinforced with a secondary bar I'd added earlier. I wasn't taking any chances. As I lay in bed, I could hear the soft lap of the lake against the shore. It should have been a peaceful sound, but all I could think about was Karen's face when she read those federal documents. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. And if she wanted to make this personal, I was more than ready for whatever came next. The next 2 days were quiet. Too quiet. Karen's SUV didn't show up, and none of the board members came sniffing around my Jetty. It was the kind of silence that never means surrender. It means they're planning something. And sure enough, on the third morning, the circus arrived. I was fixing a loose board on my porch when I heard the commotion. A convoy of cars rolled down my gravel lane, Karen's white SUV in the lead, followed by 2 sedans and a news van from the local TV station. Behind them, a sheriff's cruiser. Unbelievable, I muttered under my breath, wiping sweat off my brow. Rusty barked from inside the cabin. Sensing trouble, Karen stepped out first, dressed like she was running for mayor. A camera crew jumped out of the van, filming as if they'd stumbled onto some scandal. "Mr. Walker," she shouted, her voice carrying across the yard, "we've come to settle this once and for all. The public deserves to know why you're blocking access to this dock." I set down my hammer and walked to the edge of my porch. "Karen, this is private property. You and your friends are trespassing. The sheriff." Daniels stepped forward, hands on his belt. "Walker, I had no idea they were dragging media into this," he said quietly. "I'll keep them back if you want. Let them film," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "It's time this whole mess gets cleared up." Karen smirked like she thought she'd cornered me. "See, everyone. He thinks he can bully the neighborhood into giving up public access. We just want to enjoy the lake like any community should." I walked toward the jetty, making sure the cameras caught every step. "Karen, you've been told repeatedly that this jetty isn't community property. It's mine. It's been in my family for decades, and it's protected by federal law." The cameraman zoomed in as I pulled a folder from under my arm. I held up the official letter from the Department of Defense, complete with seals and signatures. "This structure is classified as protected infrastructure. You don't have to take my word for it. Sheriff Daniels, Vichy, would you mind confirming?" Daniels cleared his throat. "He's telling the truth. I've seen the records myself. The HOA has no legal standing here. Anyone trying to access this dock without permission is trespassing." Karen's face flushed red. She opened her mouth, but for once, no words came out. The cameras caught her silence like it was a knockout punch. One of the board members tried to step in. "Well, maybe we could reach some kind of agreement." "There is no agreement," I said sharply, cutting him off. "You've been harassing me, spreading lies, and trespassing on my land. It stops now. If anyone from the HOA or this neighborhood sets foot on my property again, I'll have federal agents here so fast your heads will spin." "Are we clear?" the news crew whispered among themselves, their cameras still rolling. I turned toward them, my voice steady. "You want a story? Here it is, a private citizen being harassed by an HOA that thinks it can rewrite the law. That's your headline." Karen looked like she was about to explode. "This isn't over," she finally snapped, stomping back toward her SUV. "Oh, it's over," I called out, "at least for you." Before she could slam the door, I handed a copy of the federal documents to the reporter. "In case you want the facts," I said. The reporter nodded, clearly intrigued by the official seals and the mention of a classified structure. The convoy left one by one, Karen's SUV kicking up gravel as she sped away. Sheriff Daniels stayed behind, shaking his head. "Walker, I've seen a lot of HOA nonsense in my day, but this takes the cake. Thanks for backing me up." I said, "Something tells me this was her last big play." Daniels chuckled. "I wouldn't count on her quitting just yet, but she's got nothing left to stand on." That evening, I sat on my porch with Rusty, watching the lake glow orange in the sunset. The cameras were gone. The noise was gone. And for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Still, I wasn't naive. People like Karen don't accept defeat gracefully. If this was her last stand, she'd find a way to make it ugly. I decided to prepare for one final confrontation, just in case. I woke the next morning to a strange silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, charged stillness that tells you something's coming. Rusty was restless, pacing the porch like he could sense it too. By mid-morning, my instincts proved right. Karen wasn't done. At exactly 10 a.m., 3 black SUVs rolled down the gravel lane. The first one stopped just short of my gate, and out stepped Karen, flanked by two men in suits I didn't recognize. Behind them, another car arrived with the county inspector, clipboard in hand, looking nervous but determined. "Mr. Walker," Karen called out, her voice sharp. "Today, we're getting answers. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll take this all the way to court, or better yet, to the press again. I don't care how many fake documents you wave around." I stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "Fake documents. Karen, you really don't know when to quit, do you?" The inspector stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, I've been asked to confirm the status of this jetty. The HOA claims it may not meet safety standards." I gave a slow nod. "All right. You want to see it? You'll see it. But once you do, this ends. No more complaints. No more trespassing. No more cameras. Deal?" Karen smirked, confident she'd finally forced my hand. "Deal." I walked them down to the jetty, every board creaking under our weight. The inspector glanced around nervously, clearly picking up on the tension. When we reached the end, I crouched and pulled out my keyring. "This dock," I said, my voice steady, "isn't just wood and nail. It's more than a place to tie up a boat. What's underneath is something you don't have the clearance to understand. But I'll show you just enough so you'll finally get it." I unlocked the padlock on the hidden hatch, slid back the reinforced steel panel, and lifted the hatch door. The inspector gasped when he saw the heavy steel ladder leading down into the darkness. Karen's smug expression faltered. "What is that?" she demanded. "Go ahead and look," I said, stepping aside. The inspector peered down with his flashlight, his jaw tightening as the beam caught the concrete walls and rusted equipment below. This isn't part of the dock," he said slowly. "No," I said, "it's part of a retired military facility, built decades ago and still protected under federal law. You step 1 foot down there without clearance, and you're committing a federal crime. I have the paperwork to prove it, and Sheriff Daniels knows all about it." Karen's face went pale, though her pride wouldn't let her back down completely. "You expect me to believe this? Believe what you want," I replied, locking the hatch with a sharp click. "But if you want to test me, you'll be testing the federal government too. And I promise you, they don't take kindly to people poking around their old secrets." The inspector straightened, clearly rattled. "Sir, I'll file my report. There's nothing here for the HOA to regulate. In fact, I'd suggest the board drop this entirely." Karen opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "No more. You've wasted my time, harassed me, and trespassed on land you have no right to. This ends today." I turned to the two men in suits. "And who are you HOA lawyers?" One of them cleared his throat. "We're consultants, here to advise the board. Advise this," I said, pointing at the hatch. "This isn't HOA territory. It's federal. Walk away while you still can." For once, Karen had no comeback. She stormed off to her SUV, slamming the door so hard the whole vehicle shook. The others followed quietly, clearly shaken by what they'd just seen. By the time the convoy left, the lane was quiet again, and I could finally breathe. I sat on the edge of the jetty, Rusty lying beside me, his tail thumping softly against the boards. I stared at the lake, the reflection of the midday sun shimmering like a sheet of fire. Karen had pushed this as far as it could go. Now she knew what she was up against, and I had the feeling that, for the first time, she was truly scared. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that she might try one last desperate move. People like Karen hate losing, and if she tried again, I was ready to end this once and for all, with or without the HOA's blessing. Karen didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. For the first time in weeks, my property felt calm, like the lake itself had exhaled a long, tired breath. But I knew her silence wasn't from acceptance. It was the silence of someone who had been humiliated in public and was scrambling to save face. By the end of the week, word had spread across the entire neighborhood about what happened at my jetty. The news clip from that day, with me holding up the Department of Defense letter and calling out the HOA, made the rounds on social media. Karen's precious reputation was crumbling fast. I started getting nods of approval from neighbors who used to avoid eye contact. One of them, an older guy named Frank who's lived here longer than the HOA has existed, stopped by one morning. "Walker, He said, "That was something else you did out there. About time someone stood up to Karen. She's been running this place like her personal kingdom. Glad I could help." I said, though I wasn't doing it for applause. I was just protecting what was mine and what needed to stay hidden. Still, I couldn't let my guard down. I called Sheriff Daniels and asked him to swing by. When he showed up, I handed him a flash drive with the motion camera footage of Karen's spies sneaking around my property. "This is plenty of evidence," Daniels said, scrolling through the images. "If she tries anything else, we can press charges for harassment and trespassing." "Good," I said. "I don't want this turning into a legal circus, but I won't hesitate if she keeps pushing." The final blow came 2 days later during the HOA board meeting. I didn't attend, but half the neighborhood did, and by the next morning, everyone was talking about how Karen had been voted out as president. Apparently, the other board members had had enough of her antics. Losing on camera and bringing unwanted media attention was the last straw. I heard that she stormed out of the meeting, calling everyone ungrateful, and drove off in her SUV like a bat out of hell. I haven't seen her since. The following weekend, I walked down to the Jetty at sunset, bourbon in hand, and sat on the edge with Rusty. The lake was glassy and still, reflecting the deep orange of the sky. I let the quiet soak in, feeling the weight of the past few weeks finally lift. That dock had been more than just wood and nails to me. It was a piece of history, a piece of my family's legacy, and a reminder of promises I made long ago. Defending it against the HOA wasn't just about property lines. It was about standing my ground when someone tried to bulldoze over what I hold sacred. I took a long sip of bourbon and glanced at Rusty. "We did it, old boy," I said softly. "No one's touching this place again." A few days later, I received an official letter from the county confirming that my property, Jetty included, was exempt from any HOA claims. It even mentioned federal restrictions on unauthorized access. That piece of paper felt like the final nail in the coffin of Karen's war. Still, I wasn't celebrating. There was no need. I simply tightened the locks on the hatch, checked my cameras one last time, and got back to living my life the way I always had, quietly, privately, and on my own terms. Neighbors started coming by more often, some curious about the mystery dock, others just wanting to shake my hand. I didn't tell them much. The less they knew about what lay under the Jetty, the better. I just smiled, offered them a cold drink, and let them draw their own conclusions. As for Karen, I don't care where she ended up. Maybe she moved out. Maybe she's still sulking somewhere, plotting her next HOA conquest. Either way, she won't find another target like me. Not here. Not ever. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the stars blink to life over the dark lake. Rusty curled up at my feet, and the cool breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh water. For the first time in weeks, I felt the peace of knowing the fight was over and that I'd won, not by yelling or stooping to Karen's level, but by standing firm, telling the truth, and refusing to let anyone push me around. Some battles aren't about winning or losing, they're about defending what's right. And when it comes to my land, my family's legacy, and the secrets beneath that jetty, I'll fight that battle every single time. If you've ever dealt with a pushy HOA or a neighbor like Karen, you know the feeling of standing your ground. Sometimes you've got to hold firm and let people know you won't be bullied. Let me know in the comments if you've faced a similar HOA nightmare. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real stories of justice and grit.